kind of from the Black diaspora as a way to kind of navigate the future. And to also as a way to extend folk practices that we see across the diaspora into the future, to see them as contemporary practices, Black masking Indians that we see like in New Orleans as an example of that. So again, it's like a lens that I choose to see the world around me and think about what are the more future connections that I can start to think about possibilities.
I have a quote that I developed from teaching at various campuses like Berkeley City College and Cal State East Bay. And it came out of what it means to teach people of color about identity, well, primarily about how to use the English language and maintain their identity. And that quote is, "Space dictates meaning. What enters that space is dictated to by the meaning of the space, or the individual can change the meaning of the space." That's what Afrofuturism is to me. We are here to change the meaning of the space.
Yeah, so I think that Afrofuturism does entail a challenge, right? We were discussing this earlier, that we have been, as Black folks in the Americas, stripped of our history, and we stripped of our history over, systematically, really since slavery. And we've been in this, especially the last 50 to 100 years, this sort of desperate attempt to reclaim that history and to understand it, to codify it, to come to terms with it, right? And to understand our history not only, within the Americas, but prior to the Americas, prior to European contact, etc. And I think that Afrofuturism in many ways challenges us not only to look backward, but also to try to imagine, where we are going. And you'll see this sort of tension within Afrofuturism between the apocalyptic and the Wakanda, right? And so I suppose that in addition to the more refined definitions so far, I would just offer that part of the definition of what it is, of what Afrofuturism is simply that challenge and that division of vision.
So Afrofuturism to me is it's a representation of the collective consciousness of Black people, and it includes where we've come from, because I believe where we are now is really an amalgamation of all the struggles that we've been through, all the knowledge that we've learned that has brought us here to this leading edge of right now. And I believe that our future is really about what we're doing now to better tomorrow for people of color.
You guys think that's it doesn't seem like it's static. Afrofuturism doesn't seem static. It seems like it's also shifting constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as broad as any term used to describe an artistic movement, a philosophy. I think that it is ever changing because we as artists are constantly creating. We're constantly pushing ourselves to get out of our comfort zone, and I think that we are visually creating what we want the future to resemble, what we want it to look like.
Actually, we can keep the mic down. It's a good little segue into our next question here for some of our panelists. And one of the things that we're really curious about, because again, we've talked about a couple different ways.
That helps. When we talk about a couple of different manifestations of Afrofuturism, and of course in different disciplines, sciences, and in the arts. And so one thing I was really kind of curious about with the panelists is to think about what are other outside practices possibly that influence you. And so the question is, what other works or creatives have that influenced you?
So, what influences me? Well, you know, the work of Octavia Butler was mentioned earlier. I was just telling Mark that as part of helping to host the annual Pasadena Literary Festival, that a couple of years ago we had a panel on Octavia Butler, and in which I moderated, and I was just shocked by 10 in the morning on a Saturday morning how many folks came out, right? Standing room only crowd for, you know, to pay tribute to and to think about, to explore the work of, you know, this, we call her a sci-fi writer, but this Afro-futurist writer and her visions of, of the Black future, the American future, the future of Los Angeles, and so forth, right? So certainly her work, but there are, many kind of valences that this, reaches out toward. So like the work of Paul Lewin, Oakland-based artist, right? Visual artist, right? Would just be another that, leaps immediately to mind. A couple other writers, Nalo Hopkinson and Tananarive Duke, also based in California, right? And well-known sci-fi writers.
I would say for me, initially, when I started creating these pieces, the series called Techno Kisi, where I was dialoguing with Minkisis that come out of the Congo Basin. Are you guys familiar with the Minkisis or Nkisi? So Minkisi just means plural of the Nkisi. And Nkisi is a wooden sculpture that I know a number of you have seen either at the museum or at the flea market. They're usually in every European museum in the world. That particular sculpture is very powerful for the European presence. And it's a wooden sculpture. It has nails all around it. And in the stomach of the piece, it has a box, and that box has a mirror. And that mirror is distorted, so you can't look inside to see what are the hidden components of it, which is called the power force. And so what I wanted to do with that with the Nkisi was to turn the mirror inside out. So what I did with my particular piece was that I didn't have it wasn't a wooden sculpture. Mine is a soft figurative, and it usually has satchels, like that range from 50 to hundreds of satchels on it. And in the stomach of the piece will be, oh, is it up there? Oh, that's my husband's work. Yes, I said, wow, yeah, definitely. That's his work too, that's not mine. And with these sculptures, there's technology at the center. So I worked with a company called Bug Labs in New York, where they created a console that had images of people inside of it. No, it's not. That's because I'm talking into the future. And so, right? Yeah, it'll come back around. It'll come. You go, oh, that's it. That looks like what she was describing. And what I wanted to do was to have the individuals who were looking at the Techno Kisi. Yeah, that's Pharaoh Kuti and his 27 wives and his mother in the middle of there. Beautiful work by my husband. I could talk about his work too. I could. Honey, I'm gonna pass the mic.
Improvisation. All right. So what inspires me is that very thing that my imaginative view of Black power, this idea of being able to. I remember me and my wife were part of an exhibition at the California African American Museum of Art, and the name of the exhibit was called Inside My Head. And that's really what it's all about, it's really what's inside my head. When I was a young person, still young, but when I was younger, I often, it was music, it was life around me. I know we were talking about the ambient sound of your neighborhood, that kind of stuff, that inspires me. Like the sound of the kitchen when grandma's cooking and everybody's getting ready for food, you know, that kind of stuff. Just life, you know, Black life, it inspires me and it keeps my wheels turning. So I'm gonna stop right there.
So for me, Afrofuturism, my biggest influence would have to be Miles Davis. I say that because as an artist, I'm always looking to be inspired, and not chiefly from just visual artists or a painter. But when I listen to Bitches Brew, which is one of my favorite Miles albums, and the cover, the art is amazing. And then I read the liner notes and realized that he had actually created that cover.
Right.
Fantastic artwork. But once I delved into his life and I read his autobiography, which I highly recommend, Miles was always ahead of the curve. And he basically set the trend for jazz music. He reinvented it 5 or 6 times. He was also very instrumental in bringing people along with him, which I don't think a lot of people know about. Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, a lot of people who were exposed to Miles were influenced and their trajectories were changed. And I think for me, the Afrofuturism is a lot about being good at what you do, whatever that is, and allowing the people that come within your sphere of influence to really sort of catch hold of that, and then they are in turn inspired to go on to do what they're good at, to achieve their own level of success or greatness.
I'm inspired by basically everyone in this room. There's a lot of generosity and kindness that I've experienced. I'm looking at friends and people who've been supportive. I had an image that I wanted to pull up. I don't want to take away from the beautiful artwork, but just for a few minutes. And then, is there a way to work? I don't. This is so sad. I'm on an Afrofuturist panel, but I'm having fun with technology. Seriously.
No, that's it. Support.
So escape and go back. So I wanted to pull this up because when we talk about Afrofuturism, and like I said, there's so much kindness in this room, and writers and artists are really kind to each other, and we are influenced by each other. And you see this in the movie Wakanda. We're talking about history, and there is an honoring of history that occurs with Afrofuturism, and or Afrofuturism 2.0, and Dr. Anderson brings up the Black Speculative Arts Movement, which refers back to BSAM, the Black Arts Movement. Right. And I was mistaught about BSAM for a long time. I didn't realize how much diversity is within BSAM. Right. And if you look, this is I have Wakanda here because I think that a lot of what Wakanda does is Black Panther. A lot of what Black Panther does is that it refers back to the past and the future. And I also have this picture. This is Eugene Redman, who is the executor of Henry Dumas's his papers, who was a Black Arts Movement writer who wrote short fiction and beautiful stories. Maya Angelou, Nikki Giovanni, Joanne Gavin. These are writers who may not seem like they go together necessarily, but we have Nikki Giovanni from the Black Arts Movement, Joanne Gavin, we may associate her with modernist poetry, and Maya Angelou too, but they're all kind of working together to celebrate Blackness and what people can do. So I think that there's a tide of BSAM that is kind of under-recognized, and there is an acknowledgement of history that's within these movements. And there are different strands of Blackness. People are looking at different theories within Black culture. My husband is half Afro-Caribbean. I'm like, your people, my people. But the thing is, we also recognize, because he's Jamaican, I'm African American, and we always have these like conversations about differences. But even though there are differences within Blackness, and we're not 100% the same, we still come together. And when we saw the capoeira, am I saying it correctly? I noticed they were shaking hands after the dance. They were shaking hands. There was love there. So I think that that's something that's maybe we don't really talk about, that we come together as a people, but we have these different movements even within the umbrella term of Afrofuturism.
No, that was really good, Michelle. That was excellent. Really appreciate what you said. I think that's a couple things that Michelle and I think also Mark touched on. I thought was really great. This idea of, in some ways, maybe the apprenticeship, the master-apprenticeship relationship that Miles Davis had with a few of these different musicians you talked about, and how we see that also imitated in the Afro-Brazilian practice of capoeira, right? That there is someone who disseminates information, that there is a setting up of the idea of a master-apprenticeship relationship, and so the importance too of the idea of using the term capoeira, the idea of passing information, right? And so that means that we as people, as African people, in terms of aesthetic, cultural aesthetics, the idea that people are wells of information, right, and they have to access that. So I think that, again, by Rochelle making those broader connections and seeing that the seeds are there, again, for the Black Speculative Arts Movement, right, starting from this kind of earlier stage, that it's important for us to move back and forth and to kind of relate, right, and to look back at traditional things, those forms, and then use that information to kind of move forward, you know. So I think that's I think a really super great point. It's very much part of the Black aesthetic, so I think that's a very interesting thing that it's very much there. The idea that you go to someone that has the knowledge, you learn it, they pass on the information, because that's important, because that person may not be there at a certain point when that information passes, it passes with them. So that's vital to have this kind of connection of passing kind of information. A lot of my influences come from literary arts, as well as with visual arts. So someone like, more of a recent writer is Kevin Young. Wrote a book, I believe it's called The Gray Album, Notes of Blackness on Blackness. And he connects a lot of the relationship with his literature to music, right? The Black experience and these different ideas of Blackness being, people think of it very as a postmodern way, the idea of forming, or a very modern way, forming different personas. MF Doom could be, even Jay-Z, there's a certain persona that he has that's very different than the home life. But it's also extending these practices that we do all the time, right? The idea of connecting Blackness as being performative in certain ways, right? So for me, it's performative, Black performance work, artists like, we talked about James Brown, which is very important, but also to literary like Kevin Young, and then it's also to visual artists like Harry James Marshall, really important artists. And I would also say David Hammons, more of a conceptually based African-American artist that does more installation and kind of sculptural works, but really diving into what are our dreams and aspirations. And so I think that's, again, these are some of the key aspects, I think, of Afrofuturism, so it seemed important to bring his name to the conversation, you know? As we kind of move here down to our next question, one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask people here was, outside science fiction, our next question, how do we get beyond Wakanda, as in how can we create or implement our own vision of this fictional state? How do we get past Wakanda? Okay, so are we ready? Get your hands up and ready to go. All right.
I think in order for us to get past it, is that we have to be prepared to heal Killmonger. I'm going to say it again. We have to be prepared to heal Killmonger. Now, I don't mean the caricature in the book, but I mean Killmonger. If we think about the story, Killmonger comes back to a community that he does not realize. Now, when we talk about, especially here in the Bay Area, where Black people are moving out, or being moved out in droves, we're talking about, in terms of me being a child of being born in the projects and seeing a plethora of just Black communities all over the Bay Area. And now those neighborhoods are changing drastically to the degree that there are, architectural firms who are building new developments, and now from whether them losing their fathers or losing their lives and not being able to be fathers to their children because they were in prison, they're coming back to this idea of a Wakanda, right? And Wakanda is really the projects have changed, right? So people are sort of in this primordial sort of utopia because the houses are new, right? And however, Killmonger doesn't understand it because he's used to what he used to see. And so in the healing of Killmonger, I think that we can get past, because Wakanda is a great gift and a curse at the same time. And so the curse again is that our old view of our neighborhood no longer exists. And when we come back to it, we don't even notice it. I remember standing on 3rd Street in San Francisco, Baby Hunters Point, and this was some years ago, but I had a friend I grew up with, we went to school together, and I just saw him, he was just sort of stunned, standing in the street. I'm like, you all right, man? It's been a minute, I ain't seen you, you all right? He's like, dude, there's a train coming down 3rd, man. I was like, yeah, it's the T, right? He's like, what happened to the 15? The 15 don't run no more. And then he said, and the palm trees, we got palm trees on 3rd Street. Wakanda, there it is. So this idea is a psychological reality that actually exists, rather than the beautiful creation that we've seen on the screen. I'm gonna stop right there.
Could I use the computer longer? I think that, I don't know, I think we are ahead of Wakanda. I think Wakanda is looking, particularly to the Bay, like they are mining the creativity that's happening, that has been happening for a long time in Oakland. And you can see that being presented in the background of the artwork that's in various scenes in Wakanda. So I think we're already beyond Wakanda. Wakanda's trying to catch up with us. So, Lonny, may I use this? And the reason why I'm bringing that up is that I'm going to talk about a little bit about the exhibition that I founded and co-curated called The Black Woman is God, and also want to bring up the ways in which institutions, various museums, have seen the importance of that exhibition on the Bay Area, and I think and influencing other institutions beyond San Francisco are looking to that exhibition and are mining it in particular kind of ways, so that it's not only influencing what's happening within our community, but it's also shaping what's happening outside of our community. Do you mind going to the Black Woman's God, or putting in my name, Karen Snaffroot, and then going to images, and then because I want to kind of like go techno-kisi, and then I want to go to the Black Woman's God, and then I want to show a picture that I think really reflects what Dr. Anderson talked about, which is that in order to talk about Afrofuturism, it has to be rooted in the African presence or the African diaspora. So there's the images. Because the piece I did last year was called Call Your Mama, and it was a very large, it was a 8x10 sculptural piece. So these are the techno-kisis here and here. This one was about 3 feet on the stand, and this one was about 5 feet. And these are balls that have inside of them sage and ash and other hidden properties. And I dyed each and every one of those balls. Almost about, it's almost 1,000 of them on this piece. And in the middle was a console that was created by Bug Labs. So what I did was I worked with students who helped me create some of those balls. I worked with this computer company, and then I made a documentary that went inside this technology. So the idea was that the hidden properties were then presented on the outside so that people had to stare into it. So the idea was that you had to bow while looking into the past and future at the same time. My work really requires you to participate in it. In this image here, yeah, there's another one of the Techno-Kisi pieces, again, where there's a center happening and people have to bend over to look into it. But then there's an Africa piece. I don't know if it's, thank you for being patient with me. Well, this is one of the images. These are images from the Black Women's God. This was 2013. This person right here, some of you may know, she's very important to the Bay Area. She's the first female to join the Black Panther Party, Tarika Lewis, and so she is in the Black Women's God. Black Women's God exhibition would not exist without the roots of those who helped to create revolution for Black people in this country and influence ultimately the world. And you can see the impact that it had on the film as well, and then the way in which the main actor, Chadwick, comes to Oakland and ends up having his bodyguard wear one of those jackets with the emblem of the Black Panther Party on the back of it. So it created a full circle. And so the Black Women's God is about creating space for Black women to enter into an institution that has historically denied their value and reclaim themselves from the aesthetic of beauty and of how they want to compel themselves forward. So this space, which was a red room that I created, became a living altar. Women, men, children started coming into the space and then started taking pictures of themselves in that space. So I always like to create spaces where people are live altars. And then there's my lovely husband. If you could scroll up a little bit more. So here you can see in this Techno-Kisi, there's an image inside of it. The Black Woman's God, to me, is already, has moved beyond Wakanda, because the purpose of that exhibition is to bring the community in. The reception, the first year that we had it at Som Arts in 2016, we had 2,500 people come out for the reception. That's the largest reception in Northern California, if not California itself, where 80 Black women artists are presenting themselves as divine beings. What does that mean? It means, one, people want to see artwork by Black women. That's first. And then it also suggests that there's something the institutions are doing wrong, which explains why they started to mine the Black Woman is God. So last year at the Palace Region of Honor, they had an exhibition called The Gods of Color. And at the Asian Museum now, they have one called The Divine Feminine. At the Berkeley Arts Center, they have an exhibition called Wonder Women. And in the opening article in the East Bay Express, you can read it for yourself, they ask, does the woman have to define herself as a male god to be of any value? Now, that word God hadn't been brought into art until the Black Woman is God exhibition. And so there's an image of a young Asian girl sculpting planets. She sculpts, there's a number of balls on the table, and she's sculpting Saturn. And the journalist asked, could we see this young girl as being a godlike figure sculpting the world? I was like, okay, so where did that come from? Those ideas didn't come out of nowhere. So the institutions are looking to the Black Woman's God as something that is important to the community, to the society as a whole, but they have forgotten the missing link: Black women. So we're beyond they're trying to catch up with us. Wakanda is trying to catch up with us, but I would say these art institutions are attempting to do the same.
So, it's a great question. How do we get beyond Wakanda? For me, I think the movie was a really great illustration of Black power, Black self-sustainment, and I feel like that's what our key is. I feel like for Afrofuturism, one of the tenets of it to be successful is to really bring Black people back to the source of who we are, because we are and always have been our own source. We've been the largest generator of wealth for this country since we first came here. Every Sunday or Saturday, there's a professional basketball or football game on. We still are. And it's, you know, it's evident in what has happened in the NFL last year. If the players sat out one weekend, it would cripple the NFL. One weekend. If the NBA players did it. So in Wakanda, there was this thing called vibranium, and it was something that the whole world could have been run off of and benefited from. And I believe that success leaves clues. And when we look back at, I had a great conversation with a brother, he stepped out, Chris, talking about, Chriswell, talking about how much more community-oriented African Americans were pre-segregation. And I think we need to get back to that in a way and recognize that we are our own source. We're the generator of our own wealth, our own well-being, our own ideas. There's plenty of evidence of things that we create that get co-opted and brought into this larger system that is not beneficial to us. And going back to my old Southern upbringing, we have to be in this world, but not of this world. That's one of the things I think can help us get beyond what the movie so beautifully illustrated. And my last point would be, I think that's it. I can't think of anything else.
Just real quickly, I think it's also important for us to get a handle on what is happening to us and what we are doing in response to what we're creating in California right now, right? A lot of people have, on this panel have gestured toward the uniqueness of kind of Blackness in California, how, you know, we've been at the forefront, you know, in many ways on the frontier, you know, of thought and creation for a long time, right, for centuries here. So right now, right, there's this, obviously we all know that, you know, gentrification is happening, people are getting pushed out and so forth, but, you know, if we think back not even that far, go back like 40 years, not here, but, you know, on the other coast in, you know, the South Bronx and Brooklyn, when folks were, you know, when New York City was going under, right, and they built the Cross Bronx Expressway and displaced 600,000 people, most of them Black, right, and it seemed like, you know, in many ways, a doomsday for Black New York and Latino New York. Hip hop came out of that, right? Hip hop came out of that seeming devastation. So something is happening, right here, right now, out of this displacement, this mass displacement, this systematic mass displacement. And so to understand what that is, to figure out what that is, right? To see in ourselves what we are doing, the responses that we are making that we're perhaps not fully aware of, you know, I think is part of what we
lean to Blackness. It's a point to push it more forward almost, because we're in the state of it being so few, right? Somehow we're so few.
The mic, you need the mic.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, cross conversation. sign conversation. Go ahead.
I want to go back to a point Karen was making about Black intellectual labor, because I feel that so much of it is forgotten. And as we have this conversation about, Afrofuturism, I think it's important in Black Panther, one of the things that Black Panther does very well is that it celebrates Black intellectual labor and Black people as creators. Exactly, I love that. And I think that Mark Derry, we know, coined the term Afrofuturism, which is helpful, but I do feel, this is going to be controversial to say, but I do feel that some of Harry Garuba, an African scholar, coined animist realism to describe some of the things that he's studying. We have Marie Baraka and Afro-Surreal Expressionism. So all of these terms, and Dede Okafor has a term, I can't remember her term, but it's talking about African science fiction specifically. And the thing that scares me is that, and I'm going back to this quote from Alice Walker, we are a people does not throw our geniuses away. We have to make sure that we go back and that when people are doing this important work, that we actually study it, we revisit it, we learn it. So I'm really interested personally in the way that people are doing this exciting creative work, and it's focusing on specific strategies for resisting oppression. And we should know the people who are actually creating and generating this work. I think and that's one of the things that's our challenge right now.
I would agree with that, Rochelle. It's almost like looking for models that are outside kind of the Western canon. I think that's kind of a really big piece of kind of imagining kind of Wakanda, like how do we get to Wakanda or go past it? Is again, looking at some of those threads of traditional ideas that come from the diaspora, and also to look at the large Black diaspora as a resource. And I think Rochelle spoke to this earlier, the idea that there's differences within Blackness. And within African American studies, there's many anthropologists are looking at those differences. And part of it is so that we actually expand the idea of Blackness. It's not a limitation, it actually expands it. I say okra, someone else may say mashishi, okay, Brazil, okay? But, okay, I like the sliminess, I hate the sliminess. And we would say maybe me and another Southern African American would connect on that, but me and another Brazilian, that's cool, but I don't like that sliminess, whatever. But I gotta respect that. But I also have to understand that that's also another expression of Blackness. Afro-Alaskan, Afro-Peruvian. So I think that, again, broadening what Blackness is, and also to Afrofuturism helps makes it more realized that it's not monolithic. It's not monolithic at all. And so I think that that's kind of part of it, and I think when we were talking earlier about this idea of Pan-Africanism, that's part of it too. This idea that we're still connected, we're different, but we're still kind of collectively still kind of working together, even there's differences on all that. But that collective way of pulling together, I think, still goes back to this idea of diaspora resources. And that's what's going to start to generate ways of being, modes of being, ways of behaving that are outside of Western canon. There's a sister that I heard about that's an artist who picked up this idea. She thought about time, and time is a Western construct. And so she created her own time system just to play with that really simple idea of like, man, brother, you're not on time, and you need to show up on time, Malik. You're using that old time, bro. I'm on that Astro Black time. So, but it needs to be pushed to that kind of degree, I think, in terms of imagining what's after Wakanda. One last kind of thing about that is I felt like when thinking about the movie Black Panther is I feel like the expressions of Blackness through technology and literature in that movie in some ways were very flat, but like here. This is, you can see very clearly the expressions of Blackness. But I feel like that future expression of it is actually, it's going to be actually like those Black Masked Indians in New Orleans. It's going to look like a spaceship compared to a Chevrolet. Meaning that you will see the threads and the inspirations of what's happening on the continent in these traditional forms, but they'll look so radically different, but the root is still Black, it's still African. So I feel like that's what it'll be, because there were some things in the movie that were beautiful, but I also felt it was for an audience that didn't know. Because I felt like for those who were initiated, some of the expressions in the movie would have been far subtler and even more complicated, you know. I think please.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this piece. This piece here is called Call Your Mama, and you may not be able to see it from this image, but there's a chair that has like gargoyle faces on it that actually requires people to sit down in it, because next to it is a stool and a very like old-fashioned telephone, like a 1940s telephone, and people didn't realize they could actually pick up the phone and then hear voices on the other side. And so for those who were brave enough to do that, you know, I had to, on the opening of the reception, like, you know, I had on a big, had an African mask on with a large gown on, and so I was the initiator for people to listen to the phone. And I would gesture to it, and then they would listen. And so they would come up and they would smile, and they'd be looking at the piece. You know, and there's about, I don't know, maybe, you know, over 1,000 pieces of cut up wood that I put together to create this continent. And down at the bottom is a timer, like the old metronome. So it's at the bottom of the piece, which is the base. And then there's a crystal bell on the end. So there's actually 2 telephones on there. And most people didn't know it. So I would give them this phone, and they would listen, and what they heard were the voices of mothers and fathers crying about and asking the police why had they killed their children. So when people first came out to the piece, they were like, I'm excited. Who's this person with this mask on? And then I'd give them the phone, and then their faces would transform because they're hearing these horrific cries. And then they would hand the phone back to me, right? And that the way they handled it was that they recognized they were a part of a living altar. So they would hand it back gingerly. And then I would say, to select people, I would just point to the bell. And the idea was that they were supposed to ring it. And every time you ring the bell, you're calling your ancestors forward to come be with you. So call your mama. Right? Yeah, I say call her. So just looking at how technology can become both this very ancient thing, a very hidden thing, and also a very traditional thing while advancing the form.
And I think this time we'll just kind of open it up for people to, in our panelists, just to answer when they choose to on these next set of questions. Can Afrofuturism not only exist but thrive amidst our current social order?
Absolutely. You know, it's an exciting time to be an artist. It's an exciting time to be an artist of color. Everything that's going on, the conditions couldn't be more fertile for revolution, for mental revolution, for mental liberation, for reform. I mean, I could go on and on, but I think this is the time for Afrofuturism to really, really blow up and blossom and thrive, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Absolutely. You know, we are incredibly resilient, and so I mean, yeah, that's. I don't have a real complicated answer there. We're always going to be here. We're always going to be creating. You know, so that's my short answer.
I wanted to hear that question again, so I can make sure I'm right.
Can Afrofuturism not only exist, but thrive amidst our current social order?
The concept of black, I just want to kind of retract in a sense, because black is up, down, back, and forth, right? So you have some more up, some more down, some more back, some more forward, right? And this idea of it existing is forever existing. The concept of black is an eternal idea. It is a forever breathing idea. So I would say that it existed in the Depression. It existed in the making of America. It existed in the transatlantic tragedy, you know. It even existed in our ancestors as we first began to make that travel across the globe. So the concept of blackness is to really pull this, it just immediately unifies and separates at the same time.
So it's about, I think, recognizing that we have a blood memory. Right?
Yeah,
we have our ancestral memory, and that what we are creating now has been created before, and that we are giving it a new narrative for the present day to recognize the codes that we can dial up and into in order to navigate some of the challenges of the world.
Right.
But I think that this, really recognizing and truly understanding that we have a blood code that's in us, to the extent that I took a picture of my granddaughter holding a bouquet of cotton. I just said, okay, I'm gonna have this bouquet of cotton, I'm gonna give it to her, I'm gonna take a picture of her. She was 6 years old. I recently found a photograph of what looks like my granddaughter in 2 time periods. One was around 1870, and another was around 1940. It's a different child, but she was exactly like my grandchild. It's in my family, my ancestors. In the original, in the first photograph where this child looks like my granddaughter, she is holding one stem of cotton. An 1870 photographs. So that lets me know my ancestors are deeply alive in me and deeply alive in my granddaughter, and is just waiting for me to dial up the code so that we can advance our future.
I just wanted, and that's really what I was saying in so many words, because the major thing is that we have a subconscious, there's a subconscious mind that we're bringing forth, and artists being the first intellectuals of any culture, is really the importance of understanding how we need to view the future, being in this concept of America where they never really saw any idea for an artist, rather than just creating this sort of mythical idea of what a people is supposed to look like and being great, right? The idea of being black is being all of that, right? And so when we say it's a black thing you wouldn't understand, it's really a circumference, right? Even some black people don't understand the black thing, right? So the idea of a South African versus a North African, or a South American versus a North American, in the concept of black, you have like a pantheon of abilities and disabilities. You know, you have languages, you have how we use the language, you know, all of these different things, from how we make music to how we make art. So it's just really the concept of Black futurism is really, you know, there's always been a Black futurism. It's just got its name, but there's always been a Black futurism. When we talk about the pyramids being developed, that was a Black futurist idea. That was really catapulting itself into the future. And so that's this idea of pushing forward, and we're really just pushing a ball that rolls on its own. Yeah, we already got the, oh man, we got the end. Yes, that's the end, there we go.
I love what Malik just said about Black futurism and about Black creativity, because there's this idea that, well, I've been in graduate school forever, and there's this idea though that if you don't speak a certain kind of language, and I don't know if the other panelists agree that you're not an intellectual, but Black intellectual intellectualism and ideas and creativity has always been there. And even if and you talked about Miles Davis, and we have these great gifts that haven't even been acknowledged that are futuristic, and it's always been there. Always been there. So I just wanted to say that I agree with your point.
Okay, folks, we had some pretty good conversations up here. We've unfortunately started to kind of come to the end of the road. I believe myself for sure will be here, but I believe some of the other panelists will be here to kind of engage you guys on a personal kind of note and to kind of try to continue these conversations a little bit more. I'd like to really say thank you very much, Lonny, and also to the Black Speculative Arts Movement for inviting myself and all the panelists down, for joining you guys today, and really having a very mind-broadening conversation about Afrofuturism. All right, thank you guys very much.
Hey everybody, so really this was a great panel, and I was taking notes, so I'm going to share these notes. It's okay with the panelists too. Really mind blowing for me, and we're gonna take about a half hour, 45-minute break for lunch to get back on track with our next panel that will come after on game design and creativity and comics with our moderator Stacey Robinson. We'll be hitting that panel. Oh yeah, and so Stacey Robinson's right in the back over there. Okay, great. So we have the Unveiling Visions catalog in the back too, to take a look at that with Cedar Publishing. And so let's have some conversation, some good lunch for about. There's also pinwheel sandwiches outside. You want to take a break there and eat there, and some local eateries, but let's come back in about 45 minutes, okay?